There is a country in Europe that, from above, looks peaceful. Orderly cities, beautiful canals, bicycles everywhere, green fields and ports running like clockwork. But beneath that calm lies an almost absurd question. How does the Netherlands remain livable when part of the country sits below sea level? Now, imagine living inside a kind of giant bowl. Outside it, the sea. Inside it, rivers, rain, groundwater, canals, and millions of people living as if this were completely normal. But it is not. The Netherlands does not stay standing by accident. It stays dry because an invisible machine works every day to keep water from taking back the space that once belonged to it. Today, you will discover how an entire country learned to defy the sea. Here, on Invisible Structures. And the most impressive part is that this defense is not built from one single wall. It is a network of dikes, pumps, floodgates, canals, polders, sensors, and human decisions made over centuries. If one part fails, another has to compensate. If it rains too much, the system reacts. If the sea rises during a storm, giant barriers close. If water seeps in from below, engineers have to detect it before the ground gives way. The deeper truth is this: the Netherlands did not defeat the water. It made a permanent deal with it, an expensive, technical, and watchful deal. So go ahead and subscribe to Invisible Structures, because today's question is the kind that changes the way you look at a map. Is the Netherlands just a country, or one of the greatest hydraulic machines ever built by humanity? To understand this machine, we need to go back in time, long before sensors, steel floodgates, and computers. Because for centuries, one of the Netherlands' greatest tourist symbols was not just a beautiful landscape. The windmill was a tool for survival. When you see a Dutch windmill in a photo, it is easy to picture something romantic. Clear skies, grass, canals, and blades turning slowly. But many of those windmills had a brutally practical purpose. They pumped water. They pulled water out of low-lying areas and pushed it into higher canals, creating an artificial staircase that could carry the water away. That is the secret of the polders. A polder is an area surrounded by dikes, where water has to be removed so land can exist. Think of a bathtub below street level. If water gets in, it does not leave on its own. You need a pump. Now scale that bathtub up to the size of farms, villages, and entire cities. That was what the Dutch were trying to control. At first, drainage was a combination of human strength, canals, and simple floodgates. Then windmills arrived as wind-powered engines. When the wind blew, the blades turned, and that motion drove wheels or screws that lifted water from a lower level to a higher one. It was not magic, it was pure mechanics. The fascinating detail is that the Dutch were not just pushing water out, they were building land. Every drained area became farmland, a road, a village, a city. The Netherlands grew not because it found empty space, but because it created space where there had once been water, marsh, or lake. And here comes the first major revelation. The windmills that now appear on postcards were once part of critical infrastructure. They were like pumping stations made of wood, cloth, and wind. Beautiful, yes, but above all, they were machines that kept the ground beneath people's feet. But this victory carried a hidden cost. By draining waterlogged soils, especially peatlands, dark, spongy soil formed from plant remains accumulated over centuries, The ground could sink over time. In other words, the more efficient the Netherlands became at drying the land, the more some regions depended on being drained forever. It was an engineering trap. Stopping the system meant letting the water return. And if you are enjoying this journey through the hidden gears of the Netherlands, leave a like now. It helps Invisible Structures keep revealing the works we rarely see, but that hold up entire countries. Over time, windmills gave way to steam pumps, then electric motors, then automated systems. But the logic stayed the same. Water never rests. So the Netherlands could not rest either. And what began as a rural struggle in fields and villages would eventually become a national issue, because the greatest enemy would not come only from rain or the polders. It would come from the North Sea. On the night of January 31st into February 1st, 1953, the Netherlands was reminded in a terrible way that the sea does not forgive overconfidence. A cruel combination formed over the North Sea. A powerful storm, winds driving water toward the coast, and high tide. The result was a violent surge in sea level. For a low-lying country, protected by old dikes and barriers, it was the worst possible scenario. While many people slept, the water began to strike. In some places, it spilled over the dikes. In others, it broke through the defenses. And when the salt water entered, it did not come in like a puddle. It came as a dark, heavy force, carrying wood, mud, animals, boats, furniture, and pieces of houses. Imagine waking up in the middle of the night to the sound of water hitting your door, then realizing the street has become a river, then understanding there is nowhere to run, because all the ground around you is lower than the sea that just forced its way in. The flood of 1953 became one of the Netherlands' greatest modern tragedies. More than 1,800 people died. Vast areas were devastated. Entire farms were covered in salt water. The country, which had taken pride for centuries in controlling water, saw its defenses fail against an extreme storm. But tragedies can also become turning points, and that is exactly what happened. The Netherlands understood that patching old dikes was not enough. Relying only on local solutions was not enough. The country's defense had to be redesigned on a national scale. The problem was not a hole in a barrier. The problem was the entire system facing a new kind of risk. The question was no longer, how do we fix what broke? It became, how do we keep this from ever happening again? That question gave rise to one of the greatest coastal engineering responses of the 20th century, the Delta Works, a system of dams, floodgates, dikes, canals, and storm surge barriers designed to shorten the vulnerable coastline and protect the Dutch southwest. Before we continue, comment below, would you have the courage to live in a city below sea level, knowing everything depends on pumps, dikes, and floodgates? And tell us your city too, because it is always incredible to see where the Invisible Structures community is watching from. After that disaster, the Netherlands changed its stance. Water was no longer treated as a local problem. It became a permanent national threat. And the next step would be to build gates so enormous that the sea itself would have to wait outside. The Delta Works are not one single project. They are a system, and that matters because the Netherlands could not simply raise a straight wall against the sea. The coastline was jagged, full of estuaries, islands, shipping channels, fragile ecosystems, and communities that depended on water to survive. So Dutch engineers had to answer a difficult question. How do you close off the path of storms without completely killing the relationship between the sea, the rivers, and coastal life? In some places, the solution was to block. In others, to control. And in the case of the Oosterscheldekering, the solution was almost cinematic. An immense barrier with movable floodgates, able to stay open most of the time and close when a storm tide threatens to push the North Sea into the country. Picture this structure as a row of giant teeth cutting across the water. Between massive pillars, steel gates hang suspended, ready to descend. On normal days, water passes through, the tide breathes, boats move, and the ecosystem keeps part of its natural rhythm. But when conditions turn dangerous, the system shifts into defense mode. The floodgates close, and what looked like a technical bridge becomes a wall against the sea. This is the kind of engineering that impresses not only because of its scale, but because of its precision. A storm surge barrier cannot work more or less. It has to close at the right moment, withstand brutal pressure, and resist corrosion, salt, wind, waves, and time. One small failure can become a gigantic problem. And here is another invisible detail. A project like this does not end when it opens. In reality, it begins a second life. The life of maintenance, inspections, tests, painting, replacing parts, monitoring, simulations, protocol reviews. The sea works every day to wear the structure down. Engineering has to work every day to keep it reliable. The Oosterscheldekering became the defining structure of this system because it captures the Dutch mindset so well. It is not just brute force against nature. It is control, calculation, and adaptation. The barrier does not stay closed all the time. It closes when it has to. That demands trust in data, forecasts, operators, and mechanisms that must respond when the margin for error is almost non-existent. And there is also the Megastructures, another astonishing barrier near Rotterdam. It protects one of Europe's most important port regions and works like a pair of giant arms that can close over the water when a storm threatens to drive the sea into the country. But Dutch control does not happen only along the coast. Farther inland, structures like the Hagestein complex on the Lek River reveal another side of this engineering. There, floodgates, locks, and dams help regulate the water level, control the river's flow, and keep navigation moving. It is a less cinematic defense than a storm surge barrier, but it is just as essential. Because in the Netherlands, keeping the sea from advancing is not enough. You also have to command the rivers from within. But the Delta works solve only part of the problem. They help prevent ocean storms from pushing water inland. But the Netherlands also has to deal with the water already inside. Rain, rivers, canals, seepage, urban drainage, and polders below sea level. That is where the video stops being only about giant barriers and enters the true invisible machine. Because keeping the sea out is one battle, but removing water every single day is an endless routine. The most powerful image of the Netherlands is not just a barrier against the sea, it is a control room. Somewhere, sensors measure water levels. Pumps switch on. Floodgates adjust flows. Canals absorb excess rain. Dikes are monitored. Polders need to maintain a safe water level. And all of this happens while people go to work, children go to school, tourists take pictures, and bicycles cross bridges as if nothing were at stake. That is the genius of the modern Dutch system. It turns a permanent threat into an operational routine. Think of the Netherlands as a body. The dikes are the thick skin protecting it from outside impacts. The canals are the veins that distribute and redirect the water. The floodgates are valves. The pumps are the mechanical heart. The sensors work like nerves, warning when something changes. And the control centers are the brain, making decisions so everything stays in balance. But that balance is delicate. If it rains too much, the canals can fill up. If rivers arrive swollen from other countries, the pressure rises. If the sea is high, you cannot always simply send the water out. If the ground sinks, some areas become even more dependent on drainage. And if the climate changes, extremes become harder to predict. That is why the modern Netherlands no longer works only with the idea of blocking the water. It has also learned to make room for water when necessary. Instead of squeezing rivers between ever higher dikes, some projects create areas where water can spread in a controlled way. Parks, planned flood zones, redesigned riverbanks, and urban reservoirs become part of the defense. That shift is enormous. For centuries, the logic was, push the water out. Now the logic is smarter. Decide where the water can stay without destroying lives, homes, and infrastructure. It is as if the country realized that fighting water all the time is costly and dangerous. Living with it, but under strict rules, can be safer. And here is the final turning point. The Netherlands remains livable not because it defeated the sea. It stays dry because it created a system that never stops negotiating with it. Sometimes it blocks, sometimes it pumps, sometimes it makes room, sometimes it closes giant gates. But it never ignores it. Behind every quiet street, there is a hydraulic decision. Behind every green field, there is drainage. Behind every beautiful canal, there is control. And behind the peaceful image of the Netherlands, there is constant vigilance against a force that is always trying to return. Maybe that is why this country fascinates engineers, urban planners, and curious minds around the world. The Netherlands shows that infrastructure is not just concrete, steel, and machines. Infrastructure is also memory. After every flood, a new rule. After every failure, a new project. After every threat, a new way of thinking. And the great lesson is simple. When a country is born on vulnerable ground, survival is not an event. It is a continuous process. Today, the Netherlands is still surrounded by rivers, tides, rain, and winds from the North Sea. But it remains standing because an invisible machine is running all the time. A machine made of pumps, dikes, floodgates, sensors, engineers, and centuries of learning. If you made it this far, subscribe to Invisible Structures, because this channel exists to reveal exactly that. The structures almost no one sees, but that sustain the world as we know it. And comment below. What was the most surprising thing you learned about the Netherlands and its silent war against water?